Hi, all. Thank you for those wonderful introductions. And I'm going to start with a basic presentation that offers an overview of the book, and then Levon and I will get into some Q&A. So let me share my screen real quick. All right. So again, thank you for those wonderful introductions. Like him just said, am an assistant professor of African American Studies and Folklore at the University of Wisconsin. I'm also do work in the field of ethnomusicology, and all three of those disciplines and fields informed the area of, or informed my first book, Welcome to Houston, Hip Hop Heritage in Hustletown, which I'm going to kind of talk about a bit and give you a basic overview of what the book is about. So yeah, the book came out in August through, again, the University of Illinois Press. It's an ethnographic examination of the hip hop scene in Houston, Texas. So I basically did field work in Houston for over a year, and then I actively engaged with the scene for, I guess, the preceding 10 years. I conducted about 30 oral histories with artists. I went to numerous shows. I did a lot of archival work to produce this book. And essentially, the book focuses on the role of place in the development and maintenance of hip hop heritage in Houston, Texas. So using all that ethnographic information and all of that other works, I show how local hip hop heritage is a product of the intimate bond between individuals and their environment. So a little bit about the philosophy kind of underpinning the book, or essentially what inspired me to pursue this work. It was this general feeling or idea that I had that the way we talk about hip hop does not always reflect the true nature or foundations of it. And so these common understandings or definitions of hip hop can be limiting in certain ways. So for example, when many of us talk about hip hop, we talk about it as this multi kind of billion-dollar global industry, or some of us focus on the New York roots of the hip hop and this traditional definition of it as a culture consisting of four elements. So the emceeing, the DJing, the graffiti, and the b-boying. Both of those understandings are still relevant and still true, but at the same time, hip hop culture can look differently across space. Each locale has their own particular hip hop traditions based on the experiences and dispositions or worldviews of the people in those cities. But this was also a very personal project. I'm from Houston, Texas. I was raised in the very working class Black neighborhoods, First and Third Ward, and then a neighborhood called Hiram Clark. When I was growing up there, I witnessed and experienced the importance of representing your neighborhood. I did it and still do it to some extent. My parents did it. And for example, this representing has manifested in many different ways. We have hand signs, so every neighborhood has a hand sign, and the city does as well. You can kind of see Beyonce on the far left, maybe throwing up the Third Ward hand sign with another rap artist. There's haircuts that represent neighborhoods. So the South Side fade, pictured top right, is a haircut popular within the South Side part of town where I'm from. We wear clothing with our neighborhoods on it. We get tattoos and such, right? And so, this attachment to place continues to be strong even in our highly technological society where people are connecting with folks all over the world. And that's just everyday culture, right? In Houston, hip hop and the music and in the culture, places play a more important role, and representing place is more concentrated. And essentially, I wanted to explore why that was the case. So getting to the heritage, right? Houston has a very unique hip hop cultural heritage, which is comprised of three core practices. You have the screw music, you have the car culture called slab, and then there's also a drug culture called lean that I don't talk about as much in the book, but it's certainly part of the tradition in some way. But my larger point is that this cultural heritage was born out of this intense identification with place among working class African American folk in Houston. Oops. Too much happening there. So let's dig into parts of the tradition or heritage a bit, starting with the screw music. And so essentially screw, and many of you are probably familiar with the music, but screw is Houston, Texas's local hip hop sound and tradition. It's a DJing and production practice that features super slow tempos and also has, this muddy, bass heavy or psychedelic sound. It emerged in the early 1990s and was founded or developed by DJ Screw, a local DJ and producer from the south side of town. He started by making these slowed down mixtapes out of his apartment, and very quickly local rappers began to come over to his house and perform freestyles over these instrumentals and produce mixtapes. Now, of course, at the time, these were not professional rappers. They were just teenagers and young adults who had the desire to rep their hoods, their neighborhoods through music. Lil Kiki, a member of the Screwed Up Clique, the group that formed around DJ Screw, he called DJ Screw's house in these mixtape recording sessions, quote, a campground for different neighborhoods, right? And so this intense competition between these different neighborhoods was essentially mediated through these DJ Screw mixtapes. And so essentially, the foundations of Houston's local hip hop heritage, the Screw music, kind of emerged out of DJ Screw, bringing different neighborhoods together and creating a space for people to represent their neighborhoods. So again, slab is also part of this larger hip hop heritage. Slab is a vernacular car tradition that features these older modeled large size American luxury sedans like those produced by Cadillac, Lincoln, Buick, etc., that have been heavily customized with these wet looking paint jobs, these booming sound systems, elaborate neon or glass trunk displays, and most importantly, in terms of differentiating it from other car traditions, these cone shaped chrome spoked rims that are either called swangers or elbows in the community, depending on who you talk to. The car tradition first emerged within the street culture of Houston's Black neighborhoods, working class Black neighborhoods in the 1980s, but quickly became tied to the local hip hop scene. It became a core practice and symbol of local hip hop culture. And so slab, in a sense, is kind of a hybrid automotive musical practice. But again, as I talk about in the book, slab is also a product of this embodiment of place, and it's a vehicle through which individuals represent or promote their neighborhoods. And I'll talk about this a bit more later, but it also sort of became the visual icon of local hip hop heritage. So my central point is that even as the national hip hop industry grows and changes at a rapid rate, Houston's hip hop heritage continues to persist largely because of, I think, or I argue, this intense connection to place or pride of place that's central to Black working class life in Houston and these neighborhoods that produce the heritage, the hip hop heritage in Houston. So lacking financial resources and I guess popular traditional cultural capital, these working class Black Houstonians draw identity, protection, and inspiration from their streets, their neighborhoods, apartment buildings, and the city itself. And so these places and spaces are sort of seen as an inheritance and become part of their identity. In the book, I show how this identification with place and this pride of place led to the development of each particular element of hip hop heritage. And it's also this deep connection to the city of Houston, at least their version of it, that's caused local artists and audiences to maintain this local hip hop heritage. So yes, Houston has its own longstanding hip hop heritage, but as we know, heritage is not flat or universal. For some people, it can affirm and empower, but for others, it can be incredibly limiting and even harmful. And so I explored the complexities of hip hop heritage through 3 different artistic communities, and each of these communities has their own particular connection to the local heritage and use it in different ways, and it produces different outcomes for them. So first you have the street-based or street-oriented artists, and these are the ones who actively and directly adhere to the local tradition. They feel like one of their key duties as artists is to support local hip hop heritage. Their music is still screwed and they actively talk about slabs and such. And because local audiences are also deeply connected to local heritage, these street artists are among the most successful and most popular artists in the scene. And in the book, I show how they make sure to reinforce their representation of place and connection to heritage through their music, public performances, and maintaining active presence in the communities that they come from. I also talk about, self-proclaimed underground artists whose styles diverge greatly from the screw sound. They have wide influences and are wide-ranging influences and are mostly driven by their own individual creative impulses. They feel like they are part of Houston hip hop heritage and that lineage, but don't always feel obligated to adhere to its principles or aesthetics. And because of this, they struggle for commercial and cultural relevancy in the scene. And I also talk about Christian artists, Christian hip hoppers in the city who pull from local hip hop heritage as a tool of ministry. Of course, elements of local heritage can conflict with their Christian ideals, but you'd still see them, these artists, referencing the screw sound, talking about slabs to some extent, and other references to local heritage in order to connect with and minister to locals. So yes, Houston hip hop heritage is also a tool of ministry. And finally, I also dedicate some attention and really a whole chapter to slab culture, the car culture, showing how it started as a folk practice in the streets during the crack era and was a way for neighborhood dope dealers to represent themselves in their neighborhood. And then it became tied to screw culture and was a source of neighborhood and hip hop conflict in the city. Right. But most importantly, I talk about how artists like Paul Wall, Slim Thug, and Chameleonaire turned slab into sort of the visual symbol of Houston's hip hop heritage and made it central to Houston hip hop's moment in the mainstream in the mid 2000s. Oh, and connected with that, I close by talking a bit about the Houston Slab Parade, which is an event I conceived of and co-organized with several local cultural institutions. It was the first city government supported celebration of slab culture and local hip hop heritage. And it was very much a hip hop folk life festival, if you're familiar with that concept. But more so, it's a great story of how we can cut through community and bureaucratic divisions to celebrate hip hop heritage and related traditions. So essentially, what I'm trying to kind of show in the book is that even though it's not often understood as such, hip hop music is very much a folk music with the lowercase f, not folk in the genre sense, but it's certainly music that at its core is developed by small place-bound communities, these folk groups, and it reflects their way of life, social values, and creative impulses. Hip hop documents and creatively communicates the experiences, attitudes, and worldview of working class African American and Latino peoples. And so it's entertainment, yeah, but again, it communicates ideas and information within these folk groups. So even the most popular hip hop styles have a folk foundation, and they all started as small group practices, and some of them over time became forms of cultural and local heritage. And so, yeah, that's essentially the key points of the book. Along the way, you get to meet a lot of interesting artists and people. You also get to learn a lot about the neighborhoods and environments that produce these artists and hip hop culture. And again, I think the key points and themes of the book are relevant for most localities with legitimate hip hop scenes. So I'll stop there and pitch it to Levon, and we can get into some discussion.
Yeah, thanks so much, Langston, for sharing that brief overview of the book. Really excited to have an opportunity to talk with you in this space about it. As folks may or may not know, we're really good friends, and so this is a great opportunity for me. So glad to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Let's just start at the beginning. Can you just say a little bit about the origins and genesis of this book and this project in your mind?
There's two, yeah. There's two starting points. One, of course, it was started as my doctoral dissertation, and I went through Indiana University's ethnomusicology program, And yeah, this was my final dissertation project. That dissertation was headed up by or chaired by Portia Maultsby, who you kind of referenced in your introduction, who is a legend in the field of African American music studies and ethnomusicology. And so it started there, right? But again, this is a personal project. It goes back to when I was a kid growing up in Houston and getting into hip hop and really seeing hip hop as um, a artistic or creative reflection of what I saw around me. Right, hip hop was very much present and local and close to me. It was booming from out of the cars that were around when I would go to high school. People would be in the lunch room banging on tables and banging on walls and freestyling in the way that Houston artists freestyle. And so, really, that was a starting point, for this project. And even though I listen to all kinds of hip hop, Houston is home, and it's the Houston hip hop that really reflects, my experience. And I kind of wanted to use the space of graduate school and then, the space of writing a book to explore how hip hop kind of reflects, local experience. So yeah, it started as a project, but before that, it started as just my love for hip hop culture.
Gotcha. And when you think about, you know, as you mentioned, this was a long-term undertaking. How did the project change and evolve as things went on? Did your ideas change,
Yeah.
things like that?
Yeah, it changed a lot, and so the original project, in dissertation form, was full of all kinds of space and place theory, because I was trying to prove that I know shit, I prove that I'm an intellectual, you know what I mean, but it was very much relevant to the work, but as it transformed into a book, a lot of that theory was taken out to make it more readable and just more accessible. And then, I kind of reframed it to focus on not just the way that place and space is manifested in the music, but really looking at this issue of local heritage and looking at, which does not happen enough, really looking at local hip hop as cultural heritage, and also how different artists kind of deal with that idea of heritage in different ways. So yeah, there was a big reframing, as it moved from dissertation to book, and I also added in a lot more slab stuff because that really became just a prominent part of my research and public programming. So I felt that had a place in the book. So it changed quite a bit, from dissertation to book, and yeah, yeah, that was kind of the development. Yeah.
Gotcha. And it sounds like, from what you said during your presentation, that ethnography was a major, major underpinning of the entire process. Can you
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about the importance of that, the dynamics of that?
Yeah, yeah. So, going through an ethnomusicology program, ethnography was the hallmark. That's the central method that we used, and there was no way I was going to get away with creating a project in that department without doing some ethnography. So I had to do it, one, but I also think it's super, super important to be in community with artists and practitioners, really talk to them about what goes into their art, the worldviews, the experiences, the approach to music making. I don't feel like we do that with hip hop artists enough. We don't really tap into or talk to them about, again, the intellectual and creative underpinnings of their work. And that's what I wanted to do with these local artists. And honestly, it was fun. I moved back home for a year or so, in my 30s, almost, no, I was a little younger than that, but almost 30, moved back into my parents' house in Hiram Clark, and really spent a year and a half just hanging out with hip hop artists. So I kind of fulfilled like a childhood dream, in some ways by doing that. And, these folks really welcomed me into their private spaces, their homes where their kids were, and then really welcomed me in and understood the project and were really excited that I was doing that work. You know, it was thrilling, sometimes dangerous, but mostly just really meaningful. And I really hope that through the book, I, wasn't just telling my story, but I was really trying to, highlight and center, these folks that were willing to talk to me. And so, no, I'm all about ethnography. That's the central method of my work going forward. And, I'm glad I got to do this book, using that method.
Gotcha. And were these relationships that were existing prior to you doing this? And if not, what did it look like to build the kind of relationships where people trusted you enough to allow you into their spaces?
Yeah, no, I didn't know anybody, man. You know, I'm from Houston, you know, I'm from those neighborhoods, but I mean, you know me, I'm a dork, man. I wasn't hanging out with any like MCs or artists like that. It was challenging at first, you know. I just didn't know how to tap into and connect with those worlds. I mean, I would go have to go through managers and all these folks, and for many reasons I was not a priority for many people. But I did connect with a good number of folks, and I think really helping them understand what this project was, promising to publish it as a book in the future so they could read it, and really saying that, hey, look, I'm from here just like you all, and I'm just trying to honestly put on for our city in my own kind of way. um, I think they, the ones that did talk to me, they really caught on to the potential meaning and power, of the work. And so it was cool. I mean, as hip hop artists, I mean, they're busy, they got multiple things coming at them. And so some of this time was spent kind of chasing down artists and hoping that they show up for our pre-established interview sessions and such. But mostly it was cool. It was a good experience. A lot of deep hanging out in clubs and at shows, and luckily this was the time of where people were using their phones to take notes, so I didn't look like a journalist out there, because everyone's looking, for publicity and everything, and I just looked like another person who was back there, like on their phone. And so I really got to just exist in those spaces and really take in everything, and then go back and follow up with artists and talk about some really important issues. So anyway, no, it was a fun experience. It took some time to really connect with certain artists, but when I did, I felt like we had some really meaningful interactions, and I put only a small bit of that in the book. I mean, I interviewed over 30 artists, and for at least a couple hours per interview session, and I really only used tidbits of each of those interviews in the book. So there's a whole other book that I could have wrote using that ethnographic research.
Gotcha. Do you have any favorite stories from that time, that experience of connecting and building those relationships?
Yeah, a few I won't share publicly, but no,
Okay.
it was just yeah, I have a lot of good stories. I mean, but Houston, one of our legendary artists is named Gangsta Nip, and he was on Rap a Lot Records back in the day. According to him, he is the one who founded and developed the horrorcore hip hop sound back in the late 1980s. So I want to put that out there. But I grew up listening to him. I was very much intimidated by him in ways because of his like just his sound and all the gritty hardcore lyrics that he would rap in the early 1990s. But that dude was cool as hell. Cool as hell. He had me meet him in the parking lot of a local Walgreens, right? And I just got hopped in his car, and that's what we did the interview. And he was so cool. And after the interview, we maintained connections. He would send me like he was a Muslim dude, but he would send me Bible verses every morning. So no, hanging out with Gangsta Nip in his car at the Walgreens. No, we went from the Walgreens to the car wash across the street, and I never go to that car wash. It's kind of hardcore. But just sitting there talking to him, that was dope. I'm kind of like bubbling from it now. That was a fun experience.
Yeah, you certainly probably shouldn't be listening to Gangsta Nip as a kid. I can't even imagine. I can't
Man,
imagine.
I was out there, man. Musically, you know.
Cool, but cool. And
Yeah,
so bridging the idea of, the importance of the relationship building with local artists. You talked a little bit in your presentation about the Slab Parade. Can you just
yeah,
talk a little bit more about what it meant to do that, the sort of some of the hurdles that you had to jump over to make that happen?
yeah.
Anything you want to
Yeah. Thank you. And in the slab, that really became again a dominant part of my research and public work. But it really started as just kind of a side interest as I was doing this field work, I would go around to different shows, especially, and, I would see slabs there. And, I didn't really pay close attention to them at the time because I'm coming up through an ethnomusicology program. I'm just there to study what just pure music, right? That's what I was there to study. So I wasn't really like giving my attention to these slabs. Um, but eventually, they were so present that I just kind of felt like I needed to tap into this a bit. Slab was, in terms of like really connecting with communities, it was so hard to get into the slab community because of, for many reasons, a lot of those dudes are really, really protective of themselves and their cars and are not always open to outsiders, in that way. And so it really took me connecting with a local hip hop group who were kind of sort of organizers in the slab community, and that was the Block Boys clique, who really helped connect me with the slab community, and that's one of the stories I won't talk about here. But yeah, no, that was difficult. But once I got in, right, I started really interviewing folks and going to more slab events, and I kind of saw the magic of the culture and how it was connected to the music scene. And, I just felt like, this tradition, which I had learned had been around since the early 1980s, needed more shine in the city. And this is Houston's a car city. It's a city, it's a car centric city. We already had an art car parade, right, which celebrates, art cars. But Slab wasn't a part of that for a number of reasons I think had having to do with race and culture and perceptions. And so, at the time I was doing some side work for the Houston Arts Alliance, the local arts funding agency, and also the Houston Museum of African American Culture. And so I really just went to both of them and said, hey, I got this idea that we should do a parade or some sort of celebration for slab culture, and I explained to them what it was and what it meant. And they were easily on board. I mean, real quick. I thought I would have to really kind of massage, or take some time to, develop their interest, but they were on board from the jump. And, between, myself and their efforts and connections, we really easily kind of got the city on board, and they really provide the infrastructure, lots of funding, and everything that was really needed to put on this kind of event. And, it didn't take, I think the biggest hurdle was really convincing some of the local community that this was a safe, family-friendly event. Because again, there's lots of perceptions about hip hop, lots of perceptions about slab culture, and so it took me, doing public presentations and going to public or civic meetings and talking about what we were trying to do and assuring people that this was going to be a family event. That was like the hard part. But once we kind of got the different players on board that we needed to, it was easy after that. The slab riders were all in. The hardest part was just getting them to register their cars, but outside of that, it was just a beautiful thing, and probably the proudest moment of my career, just seeing, this street-based tradition and this hip hop kind of celebrated in this way in a Black community. So we had it in well, not third ward, but near third ward, in a very Black community. And so all these different kinds of folks from variety of backgrounds, 4,000 people came into the heart of the Black community and to celebrate a very Black tradition. And I thought that was dope. So yeah, you can read all about that in the last chapter of the book. Yeah.
That's fantastic, man. And it sounds like, again, you were the connector, you were the plug for both
Yeah.
sides. You felt like it would feel like it was built in a way that once you are not there, in the same way that it continued, were those connections made?
Yeah, in some ways, I think, once that event happened, right, the slab community really took it upon themselves to continue to throw these massive slab celebrations, and they were great, and I think I went to one or two of them since then. I think my only concern was that they decided to move it out of the Black community and have it in, more mainstream parts of the city, which I think, kind of changes some of the meaning of those kind of events. But no, still, no, Slab events are still going. Slab has moved in towards the center of Houston's cultural fabric. I mean, it's being used in different citywide publicity efforts, and we have the mayor riding in slabs. I mean, it's pretty crazy, and I think the slab parade, the original one, was kind of the jumping off point for that. So yeah, I mean, it's now not just hip hop heritage; it's kind of local heritage in a way. Oop, I think you're. Oh, there we go.
So sorry about that. I think I had an
Oh, yeah,
internet issue on my end. My
yeah,
apologies.
no doubt.
Um, just I want to shift gears just slightly to
Mhm.
ask you a little bit about in your presentation you talked about. Am I coming through okay? Just
Yeah,
want to check.
I got you. Hmm.
Okay. So, talk about your thinking about local hip hop heritage and its relationship to commercial music. You talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but if you could build on that a bit.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I think my main concern is that in terms of hip hop, we spend so much time focused on the industry and all the artists who are, key players in, the mainstream commercial hip hop landscape, the ones who are selling and or have sold millions of records or made these transcendent marks on the industry and culture. But hip hop for me is very much lived experience. It's local, and I feel like often those local stories and that local heritage and all those major players who put on for hip hop, just in their city and made and really impacted the lives of people, in their cities in a very real way. Some of those stories and some of those people are forgotten, and that's always troubled me. There's, artists in Houston who, I think, made just major contributions to the culture and really impacted my life in very real ways that are just, not celebrated enough, and not, really recognized in the ways they deserve to be. And so that's why I really felt like it's important to understand that hip hop is and can be local heritage. It deserves, and I wrote this book as I was working in public folklore and really working with different communities to celebrate their local and cultural heritage. And so it was kind of my point to urge people to really start treating hip hop as at the very foundations, a local lived experience and local heritage, and try to find ways to, at least on on the local level, celebrate and preserve that heritage and preserve that history. um, so that's essentially what it is. It's just kind of doing my part to highlight the fact that hip hop still is still in the ground, is still lived experience, and we need to approach it as such.
Gotcha. And I mean, the term underground is talked about a lot. Does it have a specific meaning to you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, when I went in to do this work, I was really only focused on all those screw-based artists, and I had no clue, even though I grew up in the city, that there were these other artists who were making all of this kind of interesting and avant-garde music, and who themselves connected with the larger idea of underground hip hop. Hip hop that's driven by individual creativity and really innovating the sound and styles and everything, and really connecting with the roots of hip hop culture. I didn't really know that was there in the city until I just kind of stumbled upon it. And so, yeah, I mean, just like similar to LA and the Bay Area and New York and Boston, all that underground hip hop music, Houston has that as well. And those artists, are in many ways are marginalized in the city because they don't adhere to the screw tradition, but they're truly making some interesting music. And I felt like as part of this heritage discussion, it was important to highlight them as well because they're not being celebrated or highlighted in other ways, right? So yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So just want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned, we both mentioned Dr. Portia Maultsby and
Yeah.
influence. Just think about what you learned from her during your time with her since then, and how it has sparked your own approach thinking. Would love to
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about that.
Oh, for sure. And I'd love for you to share too, man. Because you know, I came into oh, look at Federa. I came into ethnomusicology very young and very green, and thinking I knew black music, right? I knew it, right? No problem. But quickly, I got into Dr. Maultsby's classes, and that first year, I learned that I don't know shit in a good way, right? In a good way, because I really learned about proper method. I learned about the diversity of Black music. I learned about the multiple meanings of the music, throughout history. And, I learned that, it was important to center, Black experience, in our scholarship and as we address the music. And as I continue to do different things, I center everything that she taught me in those classes, and through her chairing my dissertation and just being a general mentor. And she's also opened up so many doors for me. She this book is part of her publication series through Illinois. And so no, she no, man, she changed my career and changed my life. And so man, I'm getting emotional talking about it because she was that is that impactful for me. And she's the reason I met you, and we became homies. You know what I'm saying? Working for the triple AMC. So I met Federa. I mean, it's just, I mean, not only did she impact my scholarship, she opened me up to a new world and a new community that I forever cherish. So yeah, she's been a godsend. That's just yeah. I know I was kind of rambled, but it's just a lot of love for Dr. Maultsby for sure.
No, same here, man. And again, I think most people who have had contact with Dr. Maultsby in that way have those stories about
Yeah.
her and how she up and how she kind of flipped your paradigm down,
Yep.
upside down in one way or another. So yeah, always want to definitely show love to her. Is there anything else that particularly about the book that you'd like to highlight for folks in this space? Just
Yeah.
a part that maybe is your one of your favorite parts.
Yeah, not no, I think we covered it all. I think really, you and I mentioned this briefly at the end of my presentation that you really get to meet a lot of interesting people. These aren't really like major dominant names in the scene or people who, you would recognize nationally, but there are people who really, make it a point to show love to their neighborhoods and their city and really put their heart and soul into this music. And this music, really, and I saw this directly as I went to different shows and everything. This really this music impacts people on a very real, visceral, foundational way. I mean, this is intimate music, even though it's loud and booming, right? I witness people at these shows become just kind of transformed as they were listening to this very rough ass music, right? And so, again, I just want to reemphasize that, hip hop is lived experience. And as you read the book, you get to see, how hip hop is lived and how it impacts lives. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Um, I'll ask. Oh, go ahead. I'll hand it over to Gus. My bad. Oh,
Are you guys ready? I mean,
we're good. We're
good. Okay, great. That was such a great exchange. Thank you both so much. And there's a bunch of questions in the chat, and we're going to start out with Antonia Randolph. Yeah.
Hey, what was my question? Look,
I think you had two, but the first one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for the discussion about this. As you were talking about hip hop as a folk culture, and I was just thinking that hip hop used to be so associated with particular places, but less so now. And is Houston still able to maintain its status as a folk culture where other people have moved away from the regional specificity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say yes and no. I think for a lot of folks, and again, my study, most of it was rooted kind of 10 years ago, right? And things have radically changed for the last 10 years. But yeah, I think there's that element in Houston in the scene that's still holding true to, that kind of folk culture and that screw culture and the slabs and everything that comes with that. But, younger folks, especially those who are, on Spotify and on Apple Music and pulling from all over the place in terms of influence, I think the sound of the music and the approach to music making and some of the cultural references are changing. It's harder and harder to locate Houston in the music coming out of Houston, at least from my angle, right? And so I think, yeah, the same thing's happening as you said all over the country as people just are able to access more styles. I think that's impacting Houston in a real way, and that's fine, and I'm okay with that, because there is still this element who are trying to preserve that local culture. So it's kind of, I think that's being negotiated right now in the city, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
All right. Alex VC, you're next up.
Hey, Langston.
Hey.
I wanted to ask about using the car as a vehicle for ethnographic research. I'm from the Greater Houston area, and when I think of home, I think of the highways, and I think of car radios, and I think of traffic. And I recently was talking to Lance Walker about his book on Screw, and I was curious to hear your thoughts about using your car and having to sort of navigate the sprawl of Houston in order to talk to your subjects and be in community with them.
Oh, that's a great question. That was hard. So Houston's a geographically humongous city. And, again, I was working all over the city. I was based in the deep South Side. And, a lot of the folks I was talking to were in the North Side. And that sounds like it doesn't mean anything, but that's about an hour trip, right? And you got to go through multiple highways and freeways to get to some of those spaces. And that was the most stressful part of the work, just having the sheer travel of it all. I mean, there were moments where a few artists were going to school at Prairie View A&M, which is like an hour and a half away from the South Side of Houston. And so, yeah, that was difficult. Those were the moments of ethnographic stress. It wasn't staying up late. It wasn't chasing down rappers. It was really just like dealing with the sprawl of Houston. But of course, right, that's part of the work, right? And that's a part of why Houston is so rooted in place, because if you're living there, your area, your particular part of town becomes your social network, right? And so I felt that in a really real way as I was doing this field work, and I think I poured some of that energy into the book too. So yeah, that was a great question. That's very real. I kind of forgot about that stress, right? But I'm feeling it right now as I'm talking about it. Thank you.
Gonna skip over Antonia, see if we have time to come back to her and get to move to Carl Wilson next.
Hey, hi. Apologies for not putting myself on camera, but things are a mess around me. I think we're all familiar with Screw and sort of the distinctive sound of Houston hip hop in that way. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about lyrical styles and vocal styles. And, you touched a little bit on horrorcore, but maybe just sort of the elements and the evolution of what's distinctive about Houston rap in that way.
Oh, sure. And, again, even within the Screw sound, artists are so diverse in terms of their approach to music making and lyrics. So it's hard to like trace a clear lyrical tradition. But, I will say, in large part, the Screw-based artists are, for the most part, gangsta-oriented rappers. And that's kind of reducing what they do. But I think that's like the clearest touch point I can bring forth. But, they rap about street culture. They rap about, the slabs, dope dealing, even though a lot of them don't do it, right? Most of them don't do it. But that's part of the lyrical culture. Stylistically, in terms of vocal performance, there's a very distinct kind of sound, like vocal tone, that's rooted in just Black Houston that comes through in most of those Screw-oriented rappers, especially those who grew up in Black neighborhoods. It's hard for me to even, so I'm kind of weird about my voice, and you can't hear it through me, but it is there in the screwed bass music. But again, that's just part of the scene. Underground artists, they're pulling from everywhere, and they're sounding all kind of ways. And you have some artists who are very kind of spacey in their lyrical themes. They're rapping about Afrofuturism and all these different things. You have some underground artists that are still street oriented. You have others who, are kind of every man or every woman rappers. And so, I think lyrically the scene is super diverse. I think, the tradition can be found in the sound and mostly the sound and again, approach to music making. So yeah, that's a great question that I'm going to think about some more too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we'll hear from Eric Harvey.
No way.
What's up, Langston?
What's up? What's good?
Well, you already know what I think about the book. I think it's tremendous. I think it's one of the best ethnographies of hip hop that I've seen. It's such a joy to read, and obviously, I met you in Portia Maultsby's class,
right?
And so I'll join the chorus here of praise for Dr. Maultsby. But so my question was I had like a billion questions. I can always just give you a call, but
sure.
The one I was thinking about was about kind of the mainstreaming of Houston hip hop, sort of in the post Still Tippin' era, and sort of around that point, sort of the ethnographic literature and anthropological literature has a ton of stuff about sort of what happens when quote unquote outsiders start kind of feeding on local cultures or using them as tourist traps, this kind of stuff. And, there wasn't a ton about that in the book. And I wonder if, for good reason. And, I'm curious about, like, was there a point or did you kind of hear from anyone or maybe even from your own experience of after this goes mainstream, after Paul Wall was on the Kanye album, after all this kind of stuff, and UGK kind of explodes and stuff, and where you notice sort of a specific reaction to the sort of mainstreaming, because sometimes you kind of talk about they sort of had an inward reaction to it. It's like, well, this is our opportunity to sort of like further stress the Houstonness of what we do and the locality and the space and the importance of space. But there's also this other sort of, I think, idea where some people might try to exploit that. Some locals might try to say like, hey, buy your screw tapes here, it's like, it's got that sound that everybody wants. And so I wonder if you could talk maybe about the sort of post breakthrough moment.
Yeah, I can. And I talked to everybody I interviewed about that moment and what happened in the wake of that moment. And, I left all of that out of the book because it was a source of such conflict within the city and in the hip hop scene, because people felt like, first of all, the wrong artists were spearheading that mainstreaming, and they felt like they were misrepresenting the essence of Houston culture and essentially exploiting it for their own gain. And I'm just thinking about the interviews and some of the sound clips. The artists I talked to were really upset about that. And I think I recognize that this book, I'm not saying it would be popular in the city, but it's a voice, right? And those artists are still very present. And I did not want to be the source of any like conflict within the city, so I just left all of that discussion out of the book. But yeah, there's lots of energy surrounding that moment and how the artists who became popular kind of they kind of packaged the Houston hip hop tradition in a way that was kind of tangible for outside or wide-ranging audiences in a way that folks felt just was not true to the scene. And and on top of that, though, on the flip side, Houston became, and still is, at least places like DJ Screw's store and I think even his one of the residences where he lived, they are tourist traps. People, even at the time when I was doing field work, were coming from places like Germany and other parts of Europe just to step foot in DJ Screw's store. And I don't know if they knew that that was like the second version of the store. DJ Screw never stepped foot in that place, but they just wanted to get some sort of tangible sense or experience Houston hip hop and DJ Screw in that way. And so, yeah, it wasn't a big part of the book, but you know, those tensions and everything that's happened in the wake of that moment was certainly part of my ethnographic conversations for sure.
Thanks. Our next question comes from Dr. Abe.
Abe,
Abe, excuse me.
thank you.
What's good?
Dr. Collins, my dude.
Hey, what's good?
Oh, proud of
see
you,
it.
man. I
Thank you.
can't wait to check this out.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so, for a teenager like myself in the '80s,
Yeah.
here in Seattle, it was Jay Prince, it was Rap-A-Lot, and it was Ghetto Boys who put Houston on the hip hop map, at least for me.
Yeah.
And if you had been listening to some of their earlier stuff, like I had, you heard some of that really, really, really grimy, hardcore songs like Assassins and Scarface and Life in the Fast Lane. And then come to the We Can't Be Stopped album, you have Mind Playing Tricks on Me, which was about mental health without really saying it was about mental health and the stress and strain that the street life puts on a person's psyche. And so I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that particular aspect of their legacy, but then also on the overall kind of legacy of Ghetto Boys and not only what they represented within hip hop, but what they represented specifically for Houston.
Oh, I can talk. Yeah. So the Ghetto Boys, all of this stuff started with the Ghetto Boys for me. Like, you know, they hands down my favorite hip hop group. I mean, I first fell in love with hip hop because of the Ghetto Boys. And, you know, whenever I tell this story, like I date my hip hop origins to 1996 when they released the Resurrection album. But I'm realizing if I think back a few years, once Willie D left the Ghetto Boys, he was, you know, recording his own music, and he happened to one day be recording at a studio that was right next door to where I was living. And so I remember my dad in like 1992 taking me next door to meet Willie D as he was recording one of his solo records. And so I think it was like that moment that first like kind of oriented me to the idea that hip hop was close. It was local, right? It was right there in the neighborhood. And so, no, the Ghetto Boys, I mean, truly to me, the preeminent Houston hip hop group, even though I think at this point, the Screwed Up Clique has more cultural cachet around, you know, the country and even in Houston at times, the Ghetto Boys put on for the city, you know, they were the first ones to do that, right? And yeah, mental health, you know, I think, you know, and kind of moving away from the Ghetto Boys for a sec, you know, I think people don't enough acknowledge, you know, how these artists, especially in Houston, are really talking about their mental health issues on records, right? They're not just sipping lean, right, for fun. These dudes who are in the streets, which comes with all sorts of stresses, all sorts of pressures, and they're essentially like, you know, drugging away their pain. And they're clear about that. And, you know, if you look at the story of the Screwed Up Clique, it's full of early death. It's has a few unfortunate suicides, right? And so it's a truly tragic story that in part is impacted by mental health issues. And the Ghetto Boys, I think, being from Houston, were the first to call attention to that. And I think they kind of set up a legacy of further future, you know, lyrical addressing of mental health in hip hop, especially in Houston. So no, but anyway, yeah, the Ghetto Boys, yeah, I'm about to write a longer piece about We Can't Be Stopped for a local newspaper. So you kind of got me thinking about some of my approach to writing that piece right now. So no, thank you for that question. I love the Ghetto Boys, and I think everyone should love them too.
Hey, and a quick follow-up, it's not really a question, but if you haven't gotten feedback from people who were miffed because they were not included or not talked about enough, don't worry, it's coming. Trust me, I know.
Oh no, let me tell you. So, oh man, there was this one reference in the book where I was talking about, I just used a quote from one artist but I said that he was from the South Side when he was from the North Side. He got pissed at me, and he wanted me to like do a whole interview with him where we cleared that up and promoted his future record and all that stuff. So no, it's already happening, and it's all good. I get it. I'm ready for that. I know you had to deal with it, so thank you.
Great. Now we're going to hear from Del. You want to unmute?
Yeah, hi there. So yeah, thanks. This is really sounds like a really interesting project, and I'm looking forward to reading it. I guess my question is about the idea of representation, which, you know, we feel that is pretty endemic to hip hop across the board.
Yep.
And you know, I think one of the things that you talked about that I'm thinking about is, you know, the mainstreaming of Houston hip hop that has been talked about widely here, whether it's, you know, Slab or, you know, the breakthrough of people like Mike Jones and others, you know, in that mid 2000s moment, and you know, there are things that are, how shall I say, apparent to people who are not from Houston, that have become mainstream. I guess my what I was thinking of is, working on this project, were there any elements of Houston's history, Houston's like social and cultural things that are so specific to Houston that may not be, you know, readily apparent to people who are not from there, that is manifested in the representation that these artists are bringing to the table?
Oh, that's super interesting. You know, I think, yeah, a couple of things, you know, and this is something that was true from my family, but I didn't really like think about the larger implications. You know, Houston, the Houston's hip hop scene is heavily influenced by Louisiana, right? I mean, we're right there in close proximity. But I think what I didn't always realize was the extent to which, you know, these artists, one had Louisiana roots and were, I guess, in their styles and in their approach to music making, were pulling from, I guess, just that heritage in their music. And a lot of people talked about, hey, yeah, my grandparents were from Louisiana, this small town. We would go back over the summers, and you know, they would tell me, yeah, I pull some of that game into, put some of that game into our music. You know, that was one thing I just, you know, wasn't really aware of because I'm so focused on the local sounds and locality and everything. I'm not really thinking about the influence of even nearby areas, right? And so that's one thing that I didn't really talk about in the book, but it was very relevant to my discussions. But you know, I think beyond, you know, those Houston specific stories, the biggest, you know, kind of breakthrough or awakening for me was just, you know, like these, you know, men and women, you know, have really interesting stories of personal perseverance, and they from the jump were dealing with some truly, I mean, I'm thinking about some artists in particular, just some truly horrific life experiences that they overcame to produce this incredible music. You know, one of a person I interviewed twice, you know, he talked to me about, you know, growing up in Houston and getting into hip hop through b-boying, actually, even though he's like a gangster rapper, he got into it through b-boying. But at some point, his mom and whole family just left him, moved to California. And so he's living on his own in high school and still going to school every day, showing up there, going to school because that was that important to him. And then at the same time, he's making this music and eventually became a rapper. But I'm just thinking, man, you know, you were on your own and still went to school and still, you know, persevered enough to make a good life for yourself. And that was a story that I just heard time and time again from these folks. And, you know, I tried to put some of that into the book as well, because that's part of this story. Just, you know, kind of taking lemons and making lemonade in a very like sincere and genuine and just remarkable way. So that doesn't fully answer your question, but like when I think about your question, it's like I go to those stories that were shared with me so many times, and folks were really willing to be so vulnerable with me and talking about like family issues and things that they regret and all this stuff. And I just tried to, you know, hold that, and I tried to, as best as I can, represent that in the book. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. So Oliver Wang had to hop off the
Oh,
call.
yeah.
I'm going to read his comment and question. He says, first off, congrats on the book. It's been awesome to follow your career all these years. In case I missed you mentioning this during the convo, do you have a next project picked out yet?
Yeah. Oh man, should I talk about it here? Yeah. So I'm leaving Houston and I'm working on a project that explores the folklore of crack era New York. So I'm just kind of looking at all of the stories and outlaw heroes and the folks that emerged in areas like Harlem and Brooklyn and all that in the 80s and 90s, and how those stories are continue to persist and are manifested in different music and through literature and through magazines and now in the digital space. And I just presented on that last week at the American Folklore Society conference. So that's the next book for me. Levon and I guess I'm okay to announce this, like we're just starting to talk about doing an oral history collection on the underground hip hop movement of the 90s and 2000s. And so, all right, good. So I guess I was okay to say that. And so, yeah, those are the two things I'm working on right now. Yep.
Yeah, those both sound
Thanks.
phenomenal. Antonia, did you want to ask another question?
Sure. My computer is not happy. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah,
hear you.
I can hear you. Yeah.
But no video. Yeah, I was asking about Houston's status as origins of putting Southern hip hop on the map, predating Atlanta. Ghetto Boys was I'm from Philadelphia. Ghetto Boys was my first exposure to Southern rap, but then it was quickly eclipsed by Atlanta. Do you have any stories from the Rap A Lot folk about what that was like?
Oh yeah, and I didn't get to talk to too many Rap A Lot folks outside of Gangsta Nip, who was there from the beginning. I mean, we didn't get into that particular story, but he did talk about just kind of his experiences hanging out and going to shows with the Ghetto Boys and really going to different locales around the country and getting lots of love throughout the South, but moving into especially the East Coast and being booed and being jeered because they just didn't understand their approach to music making. But that's probably the extent to which we talked about kind of that early moment. I will say, for me, Southern hip hop, I mean, it was first put on by Miami, right? And everything Luke and Magic Mike were doing. Then Houston came, and then Atlanta and New Orleans. I definitely want to point to them. They kind of really kicked in the door on a commercial and cultural level. But yeah, Miami, Houston. I mean, to me, that's where it starts for sure.
Hey, we had a couple more questions come in. Langston, are you up to going on a little longer?
Hey, I'm feeling it. Yeah, let's go.
All right. Okay, so let's hear first from Charlie. You there, Charlie? Well, he maybe stepped away or something. Maybe I'll just read his question. What advice would you give someone who doesn't live in Houston but wants to cut through all the marketing and mainstream noise to hear some of these more authentic street level artists? Is there any outlet doing a good job at shining a light on the real scene?
Oh, that's a good question. And let me say, I'm not keeping up with it as much as I did, but a couple of things. There's a ton of kind of internet radio stations that are doing a good job of keeping their ear to the streets and really focused on creating a platform for kind of younger street-based artists. When I was, doing field work, the Core 94, which was an internet-based station, was doing good work in that way. If you can actually get on YouTube and dig into the archives of Optimo Radio, which was headed up by this dude who just had a love for Houston hip hop, and he wanted to create a radio station dedicated to preserving that history, but also again creating a platform for the future. I think that'd be a way to do it. But honestly, a lot of younger artists and a lot of street-based artists, they really do hang around the screw shop. That has become like, just the like hallowed grounds for anyone trying to do hip hop in Houston. And so anytime you walk in there or, listen to some of the mixes by DJ Red, who is their local or their house DJ, you can really get attuned to what's going on in the city, like right now and also in the past. So yeah, between Optimal Radio, DJ Red of the Screw Shop, I mean, Lance Scott Walker has put out a number of dope Houston mixes, I think incredible Houston mixes. So I'll point you there too. I mean, I think those three ways will kind of attune you to what's going on in the city.
Great. And then finally, Eric Harvey wants to talk about drugs.
Only
I don't know too much.
To Langston's book.
Right.
Not drugs more generally. That can be
Yeah.
off mic.
Yeah.
But one of the ways that I've started finding my kind of way into this music a couple decades ago was that it almost reminded me a lot of psychedelic music. It reminded me a lot of the kind of music that is often directly associated with some sort of mind-altering substance. And one thing that I kind of am trying to tease out here is, not to call Houston hip hop psychedelic in that sense, but to say like, one of the kinds of dub music, as Alex notes here, when you talk about psychedelic music, it's like, using music and maybe other kinds of substances to kind of achieve some level of like transcendence, to kind of move past the meat space, the earthly bonds, to kind of reach some other level. And I'm not entirely sure that fits with the use of, obviously there's a lot of connections with trap, Atlanta music and weed with like, the early 90s and LA. I was wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on sort of, what your interlocutors, talked about. They talked about lean, and when they talked about, this drug that is so deeply tied in with the culture, but is also super dangerous and, is sort of, I think, misunderstood sort of by the larger kind of populace.
Yeah, I think, and we talked about that quite a bit. And I think kind of the responses were split. Some of the folks, were really made it a point to kind of distance themselves from lean and from syrup and everything it represents and everything that everyone thinks it is, right? And wanted to make the point that, hey, look, yeah, that's been part of, the culture in some way, right? But they wanted to emphasize that it had no direct impact on the music making nor the music reception, that you didn't have to, consume lean in order to fully understand or immerse yourself in this music. They wanted to make that point. Others were like, nah, damn that. Like, this is our like heritage. This is our tradition. In fact, while I was doing field work, I think A$AP Rocky, was kind of climbing the charts, and he was like the man for a moment, and he was pulling directly from Houston hip hop in certain ways. And he made a video that was kind of washed in purple and was referring to lean and stuff. And several folks in the city got mad and got pissed and decided to make their own videos in response and saying that, look, lean, syrup, purple, that's our thing, right? That's Houston hip hop culture, right? And so directly tying it to local heritage. And so, I think, people are split because, and that makes sense, but, connected with that though, what I often also found was that in terms of the psychedelic sound of the music, it wasn't necessarily lean, that was kind of the source of that. It was Sherm or Fry. So like, these marijuana joints dipped in formaldehyde that was kind of creating some of the that created this kind of, this otherworldly trance state, when you take it. And I think some of that impacted the sound and style of the music too. And it's a kind of reached epidemic levels in the streets of Houston and still true to this day, and directly impacting some of the members of the Screwed Up Clique. and it's between lean and fry that kind of Houston hip hop gets its drug color in that way. But yeah, no, folks are kind of split, in terms of the legacy of lean. But I think even those that want to distance themselves from it verbally, they embrace it in their music and in kind of the iconography of their music and their public image too. So it's just kind of complicated in that way.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Langston and Levon. That was really a superb conversation about what's clearly a really exciting and important book.
Thank you.
Next week we have another great session with John Zwed's new book about Harry Smith. Thanks everybody for coming, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you.